President Trump invoked the Defense Production Act to encourage General Motors and other private manufacturers to produce ventilators in response to shortages caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. While this proclamation was met with criticism on many sides, the Defense Production Act has been around for quite a while and is invoked by presidents on a regular basis. The Defense Production Act was first enacted in 1950 at the beginning of the Korean War, but it was inspired by earlier laws from World War II, the War Powers Acts. There was a perception that strong centralized authority had helped contribute to the United States' victory in World War II, and more broadly to economic recovery after the Great Depression. The DPA has been amended many times since then, and many of its most intrusive features have been eliminated. In particular, the government no longer has the capacity to set wage and price controls, a change that reflects doubts that such interventions are generally beneficial. Even with these changes, the DPA embodies an underlying skepticism about free markets. For example, Section 102 allows the president to designate materials that can't be hoarded or sold in excess of prevailing market prices. The rest of the statute continues similarly, reflecting an assumption that the price mechanism ought not be used to allocate scarce resources. Other sections of the DPA allow the president to authorize loan guarantees to the private sector and to make advance purchase commitments. Both of these sections assume that the government isn't able yet to commit to purchases, but won't pay market rates for goods and services once they have been produced, and therefore needs to compensate producers in other ways. The most frequently invoked section of the Defense Production Act gives the president the power to prioritize contracts to promote national defense or recovery in national emergencies over other contracts. Normally, if you want priority in a commercial contract, you negotiate for it by paying extra. But this mechanism bypasses that, indicating again skepticism that free markets can allocate resources correctly on their own. Importantly, the DPA doesn't allow the government to just order private manufacturers to make stuff. President Trump may have achieved something similar by mentioning the statute and encouraging specific companies to make specific products. He's also spoken about the potential use of the DPA to ensure that the meat industry continues to operate despite COVID-19 outbreaks in meat processing plants, but the DPA doesn't actually give the president the power to force meat companies to operate. In the end, the powers granted by the Defense Production Act are fairly modest. It's used pretty often in ordinary times to prioritize government contracts, and the private sector has come to accept this as part of working with the government. It doesn't give the government the power to outright control private production, even in an emergency, but it seeks to allow the government to purchase goods even when there are artificial constraints on price.